So let's move on. So the Bragg thing is sort of relevant because it was in that context that we got into a little spat about Nazis marching in Skokie. And you
I've been waiting for this for weeks.
Yeah. So just for people to understand the context, you were very passionate about how Bragg was threatening the rule of law, and that what he was doing was very bad. If the indictment was as rumored, and it turns out the indictment was as rumored, and we were having discussions about what we should do about it editorially or whatever. And at some point, you got into, and we both love the Thomas More stuff, blah 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 blah. Although I will say that, like, sort of like our previous conversation about the filibuster or the bump stock thing, um, we are well down the road that uh, of chopping down the trees of the law. By the time we got to Bragg, right? So it wasn't like everything was going great, right? We were on chapter 512 of this problem. But anyway,
and to be fair, Trump constantly talked about cutting down the trees.
That's right.
The number of people who Trump said should be indicted, regardless of whether they actually committed crimes, is incredibly long. The number of people who were indicted during Trump's administration, very
unjustly
few,
indicted.
Right? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh, no. Michael Cohen was indicted. Paul Manafort was indicted. Like, many people were indicted by Trump's Department of Justice, by the way.
And so at some point you offhandedly said this thing about how, the Supreme, was it the Supreme Court decision? It was the court decision allowing, Supreme Court decision allowing Nazis to march in Skokie was one of the most glorious moments in all. It was the crown jewel of human history and the apotheosis of all good things.
Yes.
And
I stand by all of that. You cannot make fun of it so much that I won't be like, yes, that is exactly what I think.
Okay.
That it is the most important, it's one of the proudest moments in our country's history.
Okay. And I disagree, right? And I would have, and so I think the first thing before we get into this that we need to stipulate is that I will lose to you in a fight about, if the fight is over is rather than ought, then I will lose to you, because you know all this law stuff that I do not know, that I do not care to know, because I didn't go to law school because I wanted to be able to see my reflection in a mirror. And so you are the lawyer person, and I will stipulate most of your is stuff, right? Most of your description is what the law says. And so we need to have a little bit of a agreement about arguing about the ought. So you say this. So do you want to go first about what the Supreme Court ruled, or what the Nazis in Skokie situation was?
Yeah, so to be clear, the actual legal back and forth is a little complicated. It's not just some clear-cut Supreme Court case, but I don't think that particularly matters. For our purposes, the National Socialist Party of America tried to get a parade permit in a park, basically near in Skokie, Illinois, which is a heavily Jewish part of Chicago, for the purposes of being assholes. I totally grant that. And through a lot of various local government and even larger than that government, they were blocked from doing so. They sue. And again, for our purposes here, the Supreme Court actually didn't say you have to give them the permit. What the Supreme Court actually said was that the state courts had to consider their appeal without delay because it implicated First Amendment rights. Yada, yada, yada. They do have to get the permit. You can't pick which speech is favored by the government. And what I think is important about the case, it highlights the purpose of protecting speech. You don't have to protect speech you like. That speech is already protected by the majority because the majority likes it. You only have to protect the speech that everyone doesn't like. And boy, is there any speech that people like less than Nazis. They're perfect. And the fact that the Nazis get to get their parade permit is what ensures that you, Jonah, get to say nonsense on this podcast all the time. That's how you can sleep at night knowing that your free speech is totally protected. And that's why I think it's such a proud moment, because um, it says things about the process and the principles of the United States that we're willing to stand by them truly, even if it protects the speech that we loathe more than any other speech.
Okay, so it's funny. So I read this column in one of those point counterpoint things in college by George Will. And first interesting thing is almost impossible to find on the interwebs now. It's from 1978. I had Guy try and track it down. The only place he could find it was some congressman or senator had read it into the congressional record. So I had to reread it in fine print on some PDF amidst all this stuff about the Panama Canal Treaty, which was weird. But the point that I found very persuasive when George wrote it, I'm a little more of two minds. You know, I'm a little more liberal than I was back then. But and so the second interesting point is, or maybe the first one, since the first one wasn't interesting, is it's very interesting as in terms of intellectual history, how much more sympathetic the intellectual right was to censorship of including the Skokie stuff in the 1970s and 80s. Because I went back and looked through NR, and it was largely sort of a given that the Nazis had no right to speak. And if you look at
that continues today, just look at the folks on the sort of common good constitutionalism side who think that blasphemy laws are constitutional, that you shouldn't be able to take the Lord's name in vain, etc.
And well, I'm more sympathetic to that than you might think. But so the argument that Walter Burns and Irving Kristol and many of my formative heroes made back in the day is that free speech has a context. It has a context in sort of in the republic that we are creating. It has a context in the terms of what the Declaration says and is for, and what the Constitution says and is for. And this notion that free speech is simply a marketplace where everyone is allowed, it's sort of this Holmesian argument that free speech is a marketplace and the interplay of ideas needs to be allowed to be had in all generations. If it's actually a marketplace, right, then and fair competition between ideas is possible, the whole idea of fair competition implies that bad ideas can win. And it seems to me
bad ideas win all the time.
Yeah, but we can have disagreements about degree that become disagreements about kind. The Nazis did not believe in democracy. The Nazis did not believe in the rule of law. The Nazis did not believe in human rights. The Nazis wanted to kick.
They were bad.
Yes, right.
They are bad.
So
they were and remain bad.
Yeah, I'm not. In no way am I trying to impugn you with claims of being pro-Nazi. What I am trying to do is say that
just saying people close to you suddenly maybe need to like clarify their Nazi stance.
No, but what I'm saying is that the idea that somehow a free society is one in which ideas about overthrowing the Constitution, overthrowing human rights, countenancing wholesale murder and genocide, are ideas that need a fair hearing every generation, presupposes that they have that it'll be fine if one day they win an argument. And to me, I believe that society needs a little bit of civilizational confidence to be able to say that, you know, certain ideas, certain arguments don't need to keep happening. We can pocket certain moral dogma, certain political dogma, and move on to more important things rather than starting over at year zero every year. I don't need to hear arguments about why pedophilia is bad or why rape is bad. These are settled moral questions. So are questions about whether it's okay to kick old people into a well, bury them in gravel, and let them die by suffocation, which is what one of the opponents of the Nazis marching in Skokie had happened to his parents. And the Nazi argument about why they wanted to march in Skokie was precisely because it was Jewish. And it was precisely because they said, where you have Jews, you have the most Jew haters, which was, of course, BS. What it really was just a desire to go to the municipality in Illinois, in the United States, in some ways, that had the most survivors and refugees from the Holocaust, and taunt and belittle them. And I get the foreshadowing of us talking about the 14th Amendment and incorporation. It bothers me not one whit. The idea that the town of Skokie can say, "Hey, you know what? Yeah, there's no need for Nazis to be allowed to march here and hold signs, uh, talking about how it was great that so many of our residents' families were in gas chambers." And I don't think there's an enormous loss to uh, the robustness of concepts of freedom and liberty, if some local jurisdiction says, yeah, that's just not appropriate here. There is no beneficial, larger educational purpose to this other than to preen, usually, and preen where you're not paying any price for it if you're some federal judge. You are simply saying, look how awesome we are that we believe in free speech, that I'm going to subject a bunch of Jews I don't live around to a bunch of Nazi taunts all day, in demonstration of a principle, rather that, and the march has no redeeming purpose other than to demonstrate some abstract principle for people who have no stake in it.
Yeah. So, all that sounds great. And those are great arguments against free speech. But, and this gets back to the theme of our podcast today, Jonah, process. Who gets to decide? What's the process? Because, sure, I think everyone listening would agree that if we were going to limit free speech, then Nazis would be first on the chopping block for all the reasons I said and for all the reasons you said. But what about those edge cases? And when you get to the edge cases where the local municipality says, yeah, we don't need to relitigate whether women, should be allowed to work. So anyone who says that women should be allowed to work, that's banned now. And we throw people in jail for saying that. Or let's give a more realistic example. Um, Anyone who criticizes our city council members. And I mentioned, and who criticizes them in a mean way, not in a substantive way, in a way that's just meant to taunt them, in a way that's meant to belittle them and undermine trust in the institution of the city council, that speech is banned. And I mentioned that example because that's exactly what a city council in Massachusetts just passed a few months ago. And it was, spoiler alert, struck down by the Massachusetts Supreme Court last month. Because you can't, who decides and what is the process by which they get to decide? And when you start working that through, you end up with the Nazis marching in Skokie happily.
Yeah, no, I don't think you do. I mean, look, I think you don't need to have.
You're not on all these city councils.
But neither are you. Look, my point is first of
right,
all,
that's it. Oh yeah, if I were on the city council, of course we wouldn't need free speech. I would get to decide. That'd be great. But I'm behind the veil of ignorance, but like literally because I'm not going to get to decide. So why, are you okay with the local city council saying you can't disparage us in mean ways?
No. But I can make reasonable distinctions between things. And I think saying that.
Tell me the distinction.
Okay, so
the one was meant to not taunt the citizens. This one was meant to not taunt the members of the government, where it was going to undermine trust and faith in the government's decision-making abilities.
Yeah, not all
people were saying mean things about them.
Not all taunting is equal, right?
Okay.
And so, like, I think it is
What's your principle for why taunting the Jews isn't okay, but taunting members of the city council is okay?
Oh, that's easy. Because first of all, part of the whole point of the First Amendment that is most crucial to it, both the free speech part of it and also the freedom of the press part of it, is holding public officials accountable and being able to redress, your grievances and whatnot. The Jews, contrary to what maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene or some other people might say, don't run everything. These are a bunch of old retired Jews, refugees from World War II living in Skokie, minding their own businesses, and a bunch of Nazis want to come in and taunt them by talking about how great it was that, Hitler killed 6 million of them and it's only a shame that he didn't kill the rest. That's very different than saying to the town council, hey, you're not doing your jobs. Have you seen how many raccoons there are in the playground? Or whatever the hell it is.
Okay, so
They're
what
different
about
things.
speech taunting people who choose not to belong to a union? Can we ban that speech? Or sorry, taunting people who do belong to a union. Can we ban speech directed to mock and taunt union membership or non-union membership? Actually, I'm not sure it matters which.
Yeah,
They're not members of the government.
I listen. I listen to the Advisory Opinions podcast all the time, and you're constantly talking about balancing tests and a 4-part test and a 5-part test and a 7-part tripartite test that gets you back to this test, and then of course you have to like defeat the demon to get a soul and whatever. You have all sorts of tests and
All true.
trials and
Yeah.
things, right? That's another way of saying thinking rigorously about a problem. And this idea that freedom qua freedom is a good unto itself, um, I'm not going to say I disagree with that, but at the same time, freedom unconstrained from other priorities can create problems as much as it can create benefits. And
Very true.
a
You said
civilized,
you were maybe okay with blasphemy laws. I want to hear your defense of blasphemy laws.
well, I mean, here's part of my problem is I'm totally down with like the whole getting rid of slavery thing and all the thing, and all that.
Is there a butt coming?
Yeah, but um, I think that I was much. I've always been much more comfortable with the idea of local censorship than a lot of people. Federal censorship.
As in, you would not have incorporated the establishment clause against the states. There could have been a Protestant state and a Catholic state, and the Jews are in the minority in all the states, and so Jews just don't have any rights.
No, I mean, first of all, you don't.
To
No, 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 no. I mean, like this is part of my problem. Is the way these arguments always end up is you take the argumentum ad absurdum, and you say,
I don't think that's absurd. That was actually the case.
okay, but I have no problem with the idea of I know tropical cancer being banned in Boston in the 1920s. This does not fill me with.
You mean the book, not the latitudinal line?
Well, science bans it from Boston because it's just not there. But yes, I mean the book, right? And it used to be a great source of marketing to say a book was banned in Boston, right? And it would sell better in New York because the blue bloods in Boston banned it. And I like alliteration. And so letting local communities determine some of their local values, in terms of like whether or not you can buy booze, whether or not you can buy pornography and all that kind of stuff, I think has a lot of value to it. And or at the very least, there's a balancing test there where there are valuable things on both sides of the seesaw doohickey. And where I
Totally, but that's why we have balanced them, i.e., there are some things we leave up to majority control, and then we have some counter-majoritarian carve-outs. Speech is one of them. And so is religion.
Yeah, I'm all in favor. Like the stuff I like most about the Constitution is all the anti-democratic stuff. The Bill of Rights is my jam. I'm in favor of that. My only point is that um, I think a society can take some care, a community can take some care about the kinds of citizens it's actually creating, and um, a little town on
Ooh,
the
this is
outskirts
where
of
we're
Chicago.
going to strongly agree. Because
Okay.
I think it comes into effect with education, which is still under local control. A community should take care over what citizens it's raising through education, not through banning speech.
Okay, let's make
What say
this
you to that?
let's make this more relevant to like the contemporary controversies of the day. Let's say you have a private university and uh, a bunch of Groiper numbnuts want to bring a Nazi in to come do Holocaust denial stuff. Do you, do you think the president of the school can just say no? Okay. What if it's a public university?
Uh, I actually think the answer to that is yes, with some caveats in the sense that a public university is not an open forum. It is not a town hall. You still have to have invited speakers, basically. So there are some limitations then on what the school is associating itself with. The school has free speech rights as well, not just the students at a public university. So maybe is the answer. Yeah, probably.
Okay. So this gets to my larger point. I think that universities, obviously private is different than public, and for all sorts of, legal word reasons. But the university was not originally conceived of as a platform for performative displays of rebellion, right? It was conceived of as a place of rigorous academic and scholarly inquiry. And academic freedom and free speech are not the same thing. And I've mentioned this a few times on here. You guys talked about the Stanford stuff with Judge Duggan. If it's true, and I still haven't found out if it was true or it was just reported and hasn't been nailed down. But if a student had said to the judge as he's walking in, "I hope your daughters get raped," I have zero problem with that student being expelled, right? And maybe they should only be suspended. That's an argument to be made. But like schools have these other things like honor codes, at least they used to, that I think temper free speech. And free speech absolutism, or what Judge Bork used to call free speech voluptuaries, I find pretty unpersuasive. I think that free speech is really important, but I think it's most important when it comes to political speech. That's sort of the point of it. It's most important when it comes to criticizing government and government policies and government and politicians. And it becomes less important the further away you move from it. And so I have never had a problem with towns or cities or states banning strip clubs, right? Or pornography. I mean, Irving Kristol always used to say, that liberals have no problem with an 18-year-old girl performing in a pornographic movie so long as she's paid the minimum wage. I think that coarsens society. I think it coarsens the culture. I think it creates bad citizens. It creates unhealthy citizens to have the prevalence of pornography that we do today. And it does not. Now, how, right? The actual procedures of how you would limit some of these things get very thorny and very complicated, and they can be counterproductive and all that. But if we're talking about the oughts, just the principle, constraints on free speech or free expression do not trouble me as much as they clearly trouble you. Never mind, David.
I think that's because I don't live in a world of ought. I live in a world of process where I immediately start thinking through the how you would do it. And then I think about the ding dongs who are going to be making the decisions and what decisions am I comfortable handing to the ding dongs? And that's why I am for limited government and a lot of civil liberties because the ding dongs make bad decisions.
I'm with you on that. And, but like, so let me ask.
And I'm willing to let them make bad decisions and majority-based decisions on any number of things. And then I want my carve-outs. I want my carve-outs for speech. And you're not going to like this, but the Nationalist Socialist Party of America, the Nazis, that was a political movement. So your thing about core speech that's protected being political speech, I think you're giving the Nazis their parade permit then. They were a political party.
Yeah, except if I have no problem, like when we did all sorts of very un-First Amendment-y things to the American Communist Party. If you're part of a party that who by its own doctrine and stated goals is for the violent overthrow of the government, I have no problem.
Isn't that what Republicans think that's what Democrats are for, and Democrats definitely think that's what Republicans are for. So can we limit Republican Party, campaign events if they're not directly talking about
because
politics?
Again, distinctions matter, right? There's one thing I can say all sorts of things that Sarah Isgur is for. That doesn't make them true. But if you say they're true about what you're for, I can judge that differently, right? And so like what the Democrats say about Republicans, what Republicans say about Democrats should have almost no weight unless
except these are the ding dongs deciding. This is the local city council who's going to say we don't have to give a parade permit to the Republican Party because they advocate for the violent overthrow of the United States government, as we saw on January 6th. And therefore, we will treat them like the Nazi Party. And the only political party that's allowed to march here are the Democrats, the Green Party, and they'll list out a bunch of political parties that are more than welcome to have their free speech rights protected. That this is the process part. I agree with you on the aughts. I have all sorts of aughts in my great aught kingdom out there. But my aught kingdom doesn't exist in a representative democracy.
So, all right, let me. I know it's a counterfactual and it's a little unfair, but I mean, you are
That's what we're doing here.
you are no stranger to the rhetoric, the unfair debate tactics. So, let's say the Supreme Court had ruled, the Nazis can't parade in Skokie. They can parade 5 miles outside of Skokie, and let the cameras show them out there, but they can't parade past all these octogenarian Jews who went through so much. Um, what's the, like, what sort of horrific,
What's my
oppressive
parade of horribles, if you
dystopia
will?
are we living in today?
That you're allowing local governments to have content-based time, place, and manner restrictions. So again, go back to my Republican Party example. The Republican Party isn't allowed to host their convention in, a city that is largely run by Democrats, or the Republican Party, a Republican candidate isn't allowed to have a rally in that city. They can have it in a different city, but most of their voters who they're trying to reach are in that city. They're running for that district. So yeah, under that precedent, I don't see why you couldn't ban a congressional candidate who said that the 2020 election was rigged. I don't see why a local city council couldn't ban that candidate from hosting a rally in their county's jurisdiction.
Yeah, I just don't see that. I mean, I honestly, I think this is just a exercise in slippery slopeism taken to the extreme. I think that, like,
but under the principle is what you're saying, like, you can have content-based restrictions. The principle that you're articulating is that the Nazis advocate for the overthrow of the American system of government. That's why their political speech isn't protected.
It's one of the reasons why I don't want to protect their speech. There are others that we could probably list. But I mean, look, we have content-based restrictions already, right? I mean, like, I've been having this argument with, like, extreme free speech people for a very long time. Everybody is in favor of censorship. It's just the censorship they don't call censorship. Nobody I know, and like, and I don't want to like too straw man this, because, like, David's argument, your argument would be there's certain things you're allowed to do within the context of the First Amendment, and so you can, which is fine, right? I'm thinking that the First Amendment, I'm not for getting rid of the First Amendment. I'm for interpreting it 10 degrees more narrowly than you like, without predicting the end of all civilization. But, like, open, like, Saturday morning cartoons, right? Before all the cable and internet stuff, that was a big thing when I was a kid, was like Saturday morning cartoons. And I'd ask people, so, like, are you in?
After these messages,
We'll be
we'll be
right
right
back.
back.
By the way, when Nate's a little older, go down the rabbit hole of Schoolhouse Rock. It is so much more awesome than you remember. I mean, it's really astounding.
Yeah,
but
I wasn't that into it as a kid, actually.
it's amazing. It's just amazing, some of this stuff. One is the loneliest number, by the way. But where was I? Oh yeah, so, like, hardcore porn on Saturday morning TV. Most normal people not in favor of it, right? And
Yep.
and I'll say
that's an age restriction, though.
Okay, all right. So, like, again, there are things within the First Amendment that let us make distinctions, and community standards, obscenity, all of these sorts of things. I think that one could argue and persuade some judges, never mind some voters, that the obscenity of Nazi goals are different from the disagreeable goals of, say, Mitt Romney. And that people are open to moral suasion, to reason, to arguments, to facts, to evidence that would cause a judge to say, Nazis, Mitt Romney, fine, right? Because they're not the same
I just
thing.
think you're giving everyone too much credit. You happen to see the distinction between those two, but don't forget, Gavin Newsom signs into law a ban on doctors being able to talk about COVID in a way that leaves the contemporary scientific consensus. Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, for that matter, both signed laws that say that social media companies, in order to, companies operating in their states, have to platform whatever speech. There can be no limits. And again, asterisk disclaimer, my husband is involved in that Texas litigation, not the Florida one. So, no, I don't think people recognize these very valuable distinctions that you see, that there's a difference between Mitt Romney and the Nazi Party. I get that most people do. I get that you do. But there's plenty of people who don't, and they will be the ones also getting to make these decisions. Mitt Romney's going to put y'all back in chains. One of them is literally president of the United States.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, but also, I am troubled by arguments that, and this is very strange coming out of my mouth, that presume everybody's an idiot. Because
it's not that everyone's an idiot. It's that they're not as protective of my rights as I am.
Okay, so fair. That's totally fair. But let me ask you this. So part of my larger, if I were czar, kind of philosophy, like what are the things I would do? I would push the vast majority of political power down to the most local level possible. Right. I would get rid of whole cabinet agencies, block grant all sorts of government functions. The VA, now it's a state thing. Right?
Yes.
Push it all
done.
down there. And
all of it.
And part of the argument for doing that is that people will only behave responsibility if they actually have to deal with real responsibilities. Like they need to be held accountable
why you give your kids jobs.
Their decisions.
Yep.
So that said, making these questions, open questions at the most local level possible, is a way of having people actually be accountable for their decisions. And maybe one of the reasons why it is so easy to point to all the stupids doing stupid things today is that we have outsourced individual responsibility from the citizen on up to a bunch of cold, impersonal forces very, very far away. And the way you fix this stuff is let people make some mistakes.
City Council, that Massachusetts City Council that said you can't use mean words to criticize us. I think you're going to see a lot of people in power pass laws like that if they're allowed to at the local level, because no one wants mean things said about them. And in fairness to the City Council that I'm mocking, and I am mocking them, they were trying to make a distinction between sort of productive speech and unproductive speech. And their argument was, we want to have civil disagreements over what we're talking about. You're welcome to come to town halls and say that this idea won't work for X, Y, and Z reason. What you're not allowed to do is say, it won't work and you're a piece of crap. I get it. But so this idea that if you push it down to the local level, they're going to be more protective of speech? No, they're not.
No, but,
and that's why for all the things you said, with the counter-majoritarian protections. And those are listed in the Bill of Rights quite literally.
Yeah. So pushing it down to the most local level possible means that sometimes people will make leaders will make mistakes. They'll pass bad laws, right? Again, fought a civil war. I'm not talking about like slavery is not an open question, right? Because some dogmatic some policy positions are just simply settled and we don't need to revisit them. And one of them is things like slavery, right? Another one is, industrial slaughter on a mass scale of innocent people. And
no, but let's use the slavery example, because the way that we all agreed on that was passing a constitutional amendment. I'd be fine, Jonah, if you got a constitutional amendment passed that said, modified the First Amendment to say that the Nazi Party isn't allowed to march in majority Jewish neighborhoods. If you get that amendment passed, honestly, I'm fine with it.
I just don't think you need that amendment. But
that's the way we settled the slavery debate. Otherwise,
yeah, but we needed that amendment, right? I mean, again, distinctions matter.
Agree.
We don't need the amendment about the Nazis marching thing because there was a time in this country when people understood the First Amendment to allow certain kind of speech and not other kinds of speech that was deemed to be to have a productive public purpose. Now, again, I would disagree with a lot of the things that happened under the Wilson administration. There are a lot of things that can be abused in all of these kinds of things. I'm not disputing any of that. But to get back to the porn example, we all agree that these things can be limited, and like you can put American flag body paint on Stormy Daniels and call it political expression. Still not appropriate, right? And similarly, there are all sorts of other distinctions that we can make about the kind of society that we want to live in. And what I find kind of fascinating is like the the degree to which institutions, absent the arguments about law, kind of believe. I mean, wokeness and political correctness before it are in many ways of policing these issues in civil society without recourse towards law. I just disagree with the priorities that they set.
Process matters.
I agree, process matters. I just think that agency matters.
You know what? This has been super enlightening because I take your position to actually be the logical outgrowth of the deeply conservative position. That actually you are the more consistent. I ascribe to all of these conservative beliefs, the Burkean minimalism and the Chesterton's fence and all this, but then I have this little civil libertarian streak in me when you actually get down to the very end of the line. So I agree that I'm the less consistent here, but I also think you're wrong.
That's fine. I don't know that you're inconsistent. I mean, I think
I'm inconsistent with conservative philosophy.
Maybe, possibly. I you mentioned Burke. Burke has this line where he says, "I must bear with infirmities until they fester into crimes." And I think that one of the great things about conservatism is that it acknowledges its own dogma and understands that its principles are often in conflict with each other. Right. The problem I have with liberals, including a lot of civil libertarians, is they think all good things go together. The only, and we've had this discussion, when we did that thing for the Constitution Center about transparency, right? It turns out that there's totally such a thing as too much of a good thing.
Yeah, you really convinced me on the transparency point, by the way.
Thank you. So at one point we will convince you that Nazis should not be allowed to march in Jewish neighborhoods. But my point is that conservatism just sort of acknowledges, even if there's not a lot you can do about it, that not all good things go together, because life is fallen, life is imperfect. You cannot immanentize the eschaton, and more speech does not necessarily the cure for free speech problems isn't necessarily more free speech any more than the cure for our political problems is more transparency.
And I see, this is where I think we've actually violently agreed in this conversation. I totally agree with you that more speech is not the cure to our political problems or disagreements or anything else. Where I protect it nevertheless, in the extreme, as I think you're right that I do, is that I can't come up with a way to limit it that protects all the speech that I think needs to be protected against majority opinion. All the stuff about, literally just any conversation that we've had as a society, most of the correct opinions started as extreme minority opinions. And so I can't come up with the process. I can't come up with the limiting principle. And until I do, then I'm going to be a free speech extremist. I agree in your world of aughts that free speech at the extreme is unhelpful at best and harmful at worst, and that the right argument, the quote unquote right argument, certainly doesn't always win in the short term. Sometimes it doesn't even win in the long term. But I can't come up with the limit.
Yeah.
So
I think the federalism thing kind of solves some of that. If you're in a place where you're not allowed to let your freak flag fly the way you want, you do this thing that social scientists call move, and go someplace that is in more accordance with your values and your principles, or you stay and fight it democratically.
That's what Austin, Texas was built on.
There you go.
Keep Austin weird. Although, you know what, frankly, for any of you who are currently living in Austin who display a keep Austin weird anything, unless you lived there by 1996, 8, I don't know, I'll give you a few years wiggle room on either end of that. That is not keep Austin weird that y'all are doing there anymore. Keep Austin weird was like when my uncle still lives there, but like he's an original Austin guy, and they were living exactly the lifestyle that Jonah's
Yeah, I mean,
describing.
Keep Austin Weird now is kind of like Keep Austin Weird TM. You know,
Yes, exactly.
it's very
and
corporatized.
and I don't even know how to explain it because it doesn't fall along the political spectrum. It's like it's some it's a little bit of hippie, a little bit of Western freedom, a little libertarian, a little Willie Nelson. I don't know. There's a whole lot poured into what made Austin and its politics and all of that. And I miss it actually, even if it was weird.
Yeah, no, like I want this to be a more, I cross country drive a lot. I want this to be a much weirder country to drive across, where you go to weirder places where they do things differently, and federalism is the greatest system ever conceived of for maximizing human happiness, and I can show you the math. But I can tell that you want to get away from this. You were like, it's like I'm muttering to myself, and I sat next to you on a bus with a lot of empty seats, and you're like, "Excuse me, sir." So I will let you go.
No, but you know what's fascinating about this though is that I told our producer this before we started. We were joking that you were 2 minutes late, and he was like, "You'll be fine. You could just do it on your own, and you're very good at steel manning." And I was like, "Yeah, but I understand the like 22-year-old college student argument for why free speech is bad. And I actually don't understand Jonah's argument for why free speech is bad." So this has been incredibly illuminating
Again, I don't think it's
because
bad. I think
yeah, you do.
no.
You're against it. You hate free speech and you hate freedom and you want mob rule on all things. And I hear that and I accept it. But now I understand
Uh-huh.
it in a way that I didn't
See,
before.
one of the great things about being the host of this podcast is that after you leave, I have some closing remarks, so I can respond to these
Oh
calumnies.
no. uh no, but seriously, like this is the conservative argument and the principled conservative argument about limitations. And blasphemy laws or not, I think that it's very helpful to see it from the right. Though the fact that the same argument exists on the left to me should be concerning because they're coming at it from a totally different
Yeah. So here's where I'm more on team Isgur, right? Just to be very quick about the blasphemy law thing.
Mhm.
In a community, again, because I think distinctions matter. You can make distinctions
Mhm.
here, right? In a
Mhm.
community, like in an Amish community, let's say there's a county that is 95% Amish.
Mhm.
Bothers me not one whit if they have some blasphemy laws. Like, I mean, you can't be put to death for blasphemy. You can't have a hand cut off, right? But like, if
No, you're fined. It's a $20
yeah,
civil fine.
they charge you a chicken. Okay, fine, that's fine. It does not upset me greatly, right? My
Mhm.
problem with the blasphemy law types now, and I would I'm going to go all horse theory on you. I think the people who like blasphemy laws on the sort of post liberal inclusive right, and the people who like punishing speech on the left, they don't call it blasphemy, but that's what they believe because it's basically a political religion.
Correct. Their blasphemy is different.
Right.
Yeah.
And my problem with those blasphemy laws is they're talking about communities that are not 95% shared values, but they're talking about using power to impose their views because they're a minority and it's a sign of their weakness that they want to punish people who disagree with them. It's not a sign of their strength. Rousseau, who I'm not a fan of, but he has this great bit about how censorship has never been useful for restoring morals. It's only useful for preserving them. And a lot of the things that people want to use things like blasphemy laws for, either on the left or on the right, they're political or cultural minorities, but with power. And what they're trying to do is make their opponents shut up about things that they can't win, right? So like it's a different thing.
But there's a key in what you just said, but they're in power. And so if they're able to pass their blasphemy laws through the city council or through the university's speech code or whatever else, how are we supposed to know which ones are constitutional because it's 95% Amish versus the ones that, the community's 40% you shouldn't be able to use the wrong pronouns, but they control the majority of the city council right now because not that many people vote in city council races. So they pass a civil fine if you misgender someone.
Yeah, and
Same thing to me.
yeah, except it's to me it's let's trot out the balancing test. Let's come up with a, a way to think about this in a rigorous, serious, grown-up way. You've used the phrase a bunch of times. Who are we to judge? Who gets to decide? And the answer, almost whenever I hear people ask that question, I'm like, us? Like the people are the leaders of
But in your
institutions,
version, I think I heard that like you can just move if you don't like the civil fines for misgendering someone. If it's the majority as judged by the political representatives of that community, and they want a civil fine for misgendering someone, from your pluralistic federalism standpoint, that should be okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we can have a balancing test about it, but yeah, let's say in principle, let's say it's okay. I said you have two choices. You can move, or you can
Uh-huh.
democratically fight it and say, this is ridiculous. I'm a citizen here too. This is not justified or justifiable. And let's have a big honking argument about it and be a pain in the ass. And that's fine too.
Ooh, see, the majority can now take that and say that even debating that should be off the table because that's violence against the people that you're talking about
Yeah, but
and
it's not
taunting
violence, and
them a la the Jews.
people can say whatever they
Again,
want.
like, uh, oh, people can say whatever they want, huh?
I'm
Huh?
my
Did you just say
no,
that?
I don't mean as a legal thing. I mean as a people can make whatever arguments they want. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean they're going to be persuasive. And that's part of my problem with your approach to
But
this is you just keep saying, well, they can just argue, that the Green Party is no different than the Communist Party and the Republican Party is no different than the Nazis. Yeah, they can argue that, but who are they going to persuade on that? And if they do persuade a
but
lot of
that's
people on
my
that, we got much bigger problems than the crap we're talking about.
I think that this example is incredibly realistic that a city council passes an ordinance that has a civil fine for misgendering someone. And then when there is a democratic debate over it, they pass another ordinance that says that you are not allowed to uh, demean or belittle someone due to their gender identity, that causes harm and violence. People, it increases suicide rate. They cite all this stuff. And so they put a ban on that. And so, yeah, you can debate it still, but you're not allowed to actually ever talk about what you're debating because that would be encouraging misgendering. And I think that's really realistic. And I'm not
You
sure
may be
why.
realistic, but I mean, you're ending the story there, right? And so then people say, well, go ahead and fine me. And they start doing civil disobedience stuff. Much like prohibition and many other things, the municipality realizes, this thing bought us more trouble than it's worth, and we got a lot of flight. A lot of businesses are leaving. We're getting made fun of by a lot of people. Let people live with the consequences of their bad decisions a little bit,
Okay.
and maybe we have a
No, no, no. If
healthier
you're good with that,
society.
then I can then you are accepting as the consequences of your free speech limitations.
I must bear with infirmities until they fester into crimes. Now, again, if they start cutting off people's heads, balancing test, like that's cruel and unusual punishment, and like we gotta step in, stop off, start with fingers, before you do something like that.
Right. Right. Fair.